Hello, I'm Robert, and fact checker and science blog and helping people who are scared of many things. And this time I'm going to be talking about people worried that we're not going to be able to have enough food, and especially worried about the COVID-19 pandemic. You've seen the panics of people panic buying in shops, and they have no idea that actually the vast stocks of food, all they do by the panic buying is forcing lots of people to scurry around rushing food to the shops in order to fill the shelves again. And so they're basically taking what used to be stores in factories and so on and storing it in their houses. And then you have a big length of time when there's nobody buying anything in the shops. Then they have another panic buy and they rush the food out again. But there's plenty of food in the world. Plenty of food. When you see the projections of sadly worried about, for instance, in the Yemen, where there's a lot of fighting going on, and there's because of COVID-19 as well, there's been a reduction in the support from the international community. So that's the sort of situation that's leading to projections of potential famine. And we are now much better than we used to be in the 1970s and 80s, when you get the projection of famine, then people act early on rather than waiting for it to actually happen. And so there's been these recent stories about 27 countries with a projection of famine. What they don't explain is that these same 27 countries had a projection of famine in 2019. And it's only a few percent difference this year. So you need to watch out a little bit for these activism things. And we do, of course, have to rise to these projections and make sure that they don't have famine in these countries. But it's not a problem of global food. We've got plenty of food. It's a problem of politics and economics and decisions that people make as to how to support the various parts of the world where there are these risks of famine. So this shows cereal, and in many parts of the world, apart from like Eskimos and Laplanders and so on, many parts of the world, then cereal is your staple. And if you've got enough cereal, then you add your milk, your cheese, your meat on top of that, vegetables of course. So we have plenty of cereal for the world. The food used is projected to go up a bit, but the food produced is constantly going up. Every year there's been an increase in the amount of food produced. And the amount of these grey panels, grey bars, show the amount of food that has been left, that we have the excess at the end of each year. So just before the next harvest, then what if there was no harvest at all? Well, it turns out that we have enough food part of this will be in the reserves, the food reserves of China, United States and so on. Big countries have huge food reserves of cereals. And then part of it is farmers just holding back their grains in order to get a good price later on, because there's been too much. So they wait for a better price. So we have an actual record. This is more even than in 2016, which was the previous record, the amount of food stocks that we're projected to have this year. So that's the situation with cereals. Let's look at other food. So yes, I've got the number there. Oh, I've got to refresh this page, sorry. I didn't edit. Just a minute. Refresh the page. Slightly out of date. So you just see what the actual figure. Oh, I can't have saved it. Just give me a moment. How strange. I've just been working on that a minute. Yes, I've got it there. Why is it not appearing here? Sorry, wait a minute. Do the F11 thing again. Refresh. Why is it not showing? Oh, there we are. It's done it now. Some glitch. I didn't even save it on the other page. So yes, so we've got a record of 2,750 million tonnes, which is 1.6% more than the 2019 output. That's the cereals for the rest of this year. Then we look at and then in the next year, then farmers have been encouraged by high prices, and they're expected to plant more cereals, especially in the EU, and and also be likely to be higher than above average wheat acreages in China, India, and Pakistan, because of the high prices and plenty of supplies of fertilizer and such like. And so, but there's going to be reduced yields in the USA, in reduced rainfall in the southern and central parts of the Great Plains, and in Russia. So that's for next year. But the combination of all that, then the outlook is good for like 21, 22. It's also going to be a good outlook. And look at other food. And sugar, sugar is increased because of increase in India and in Brazil, and despite low output in Thailand and the EU. And meat is down, but the meat consumption is also down. And because people are eating less meat because they've got lower income during the pandemic, and because they're not eating out so much. There's an increase in milk because of favourable monsoons in India and the resilience of village cooperatives to the pandemic. And it's also forecast to rise in Russia and China because of expansion in large-scale dairy farms in Oceania because of the favourable weather, but a fall in Brazil. And catches of wild fish are expected to decline because of COVID-19, but the consumption is also down because of the pandemic. So that those kind of cancel each other out. And fish farming, it's also there's reduced demand for fish, again for the same reasons that people are not eating out so much and lower income, and so the especially the shrimp and pangus farmers, they can quickly reduce their output, but the salmon, then they're continuing having to produce more than is needed at the moment. So now the one area where the problems of producing enough is tropical fruit, and that's mainly because of quarantine delays in the ports. Because they're easily, like even pineapples and mangoes and things, they'll rot very easily, and the quarantine delays in the ports, and then there's just a big shortage in capacity and air freight, because a lot of them have to be flown in planes, and it's being used for other things, and because of the pandemic, so there's a big shortage there. And then local markets, because a lot of it has to be sold quickly on the local markets, and then reduced demand because of the high prices. So if your income is going down a bit, then one of the things you're going to cut down on are expensive fruits. And then you've got the closure of schools, canteens, restaurants, bars, and hotels, because that's where they're most often eaten. But and there's a similar issue in China for avocados in the earlier phase of the pandemic. But there's also been an increased focus on good nutrition during lockdown. That's been increased demand. And bananas were very popular during lockdown because they last for longer, especially with the panic buying and people thinking, oh, I've got to get lots of food, and I want it to be able to last a long time, because they didn't realise that they would stay. I don't know what, it was not very logical, because there's plenty of food, but people were illogical and panicking, even though the shops weren't going to close, and just because of the lockdown and staying at home, and then they went out and panic bought lots of food, even though they didn't need to at all. And so one of the things they panic bought were bananas. So that's led to a 2.9% increase in record exports from Ecuador, and recovery of production in Costa Rica, and all this to meet the demand on bananas during lockdown of panic buyers. And the EU had a 5.6% increase from January to June, with the panic buyers being part of that, and also because of increase being advised to feed yourself well during lockdown and work on improved nutrition. So we've actually got better nutrition as a result of the lockdown, and so increase the intake of fruit and vegetables. So sadly, but there was a reduced demand for avocados because people tend to eat those in hotels, in the USA especially. So, but sadly, they weren't able to keep up with some of the other fruits, especially things like papaya and mangoes. Then those, I'm not sure if I put that there, but now if we look long term, so they just weren't able to get enough people to package them and export them. And so even though they had plenty of pineapples and mangoes, they just couldn't get them to the people who wanted to buy them because of lockdowns affecting the packaging and exports. So there never was any shortage of pineapples or mangoes. It's just the case of getting them from the exporting countries. Long term, the prospects are very good. So look, this is the mango consumption. What's expected to happen in 2029. That's it's just increasing. Pineapples, avocados, and papaya, they're all increasing demand and increasing production. Look, huge increase in avocados, more than double in since the 2007 to 2029. So look at the outlook in 2029 more generally. So if we have a look at that, these trends in agriculture, then you can see that these different shadings, then this is due to the this is the livestock crops and fisheries. So these are expected to increase, and you see Asia is the largest producer and it's going to increase hugely. There's a big increase in sub-Saharan Africa compared to, even though it's got a very small amount. And if you look at China, and sub-Saharan Africa is much larger than China, but China has far more output than sub-Saharan Africa. And sub-Saharan Africa is expected to hugely increase over the course of this century. The reason is because, well, we have a look down here. Let's have a look down here. There we are. Look at how good the cereal yields are. This is Africa, and this is the United States. That's above 8.1 tons per hectare, and this is less than 2 tons per hectare. So that's about 5 times higher than Africa. And China is about China's about double India. And if you look at Brazil, which is one of the better countries, it's still only half the United States. So the reason is, it's partly lack of investment, lack of technology. People just not investing enough in African agriculture and not developing the technology, and also the crop varieties. So the special crops that you grow mainly in Africa, like cassava, and they just haven't had the work on improving their yields that has happened in the rest of the world, because in the rest of the world the Green Revolution in the 1950s through to 70s, 80s, and still continuing to this day, huge work on improving the yields of rice, for instance, and then improvements in also education and the way the farms are run, and improving fertilizer, improving irrigation, and so on. This has led to huge increases. Look at the increase in China from, say, 1961, where it was similar to Africa, you see. Less than 2 tons per yield, now it's up to about 6. And look at the United States, increased from above 2 all the way up to 8.1. So Africa could go up like that too. There's no reason why Africa can't go up to there eventually. And then, so if you go back to that figure I was looking at, so then if you look at Africa and imagine you've got, that much food, it could be the same as China easily, or even more. So if you went up US levels, then it could be far higher than China. So that's we have a huge amount of expansion capability there, not even having to increase the land, but increasing the, and is this the one with the, oh yes, this shows how it happens. So this is a little bit harder to read. This is the percentage increase. That's increased from 2019 to 2019, 2020 to 2029, 2010 to 2019. So this was an increase in land area, the blue bits. And that's how it's happened. In sub-Saharan Africa, there's been a huge increase in land area, but they don't expect to do any more of that. Most of the rest of the increase is, this is the percentage increase of the previous year. So it looks as if that's less than that, but it's not. This means more than this year, because that's the percentage increase from the previous year. So they're still expecting a 15%, 16% increase, and that's largely because improvements in the yields, growth in yields, and some multi-crop cropping. And so you can see, generally, it's mostly improvements in the yields, which are going to be the thing, like in North America, almost entirely. In fact, it's a reduction in land area, but an increase in the yields. And whereas it was increased in land area, now it's reduction, because they're returning some of the land to other things. So that's the main way that we're going to be increasing for the next decade, is increasing yield. In fact, 88% of the increase in the next decade is going to be increasing yields. And much of the rest of the increase is going to be through multi-cropping. And this shows multi-cropping. You see there's an awful lot of it in northern India and in China. The idea of multi-cropping is that, well, in India and in China, it used to be that farmers would grow rice in the wet season, and then they just left the land fallow in the dry season, didn't grow anything. But they developed new varieties of rice that crop much faster. And as a result, before the end of the dry season, you harvest your rice, and the land is still wet. And then you can grow things like chickpeas. You can sow the chickpeas into the land while it's still wet, and then the chickpeas grow through the dry season. So as a result of this, mainly because of a shorter, faster yield growth of rice, they can now grow 2 crops in India and China, where they used to grow just 1 crop, and this doubles the yields. And here's that doubles the yields for multi-cropping. And there was some, I've got some examples here somewhere. The story of multi-cropping. Have I got a section? No. Early days of double cropping. I should pop that up there in that other section, I suppose. But in Bangladesh, it started in 2007. It started in Barind, and soon thousands of farms in 300 villages got nearly twice as much from the land. In Nepal, it started with 57 farmer groups in 4 districts, and the sales of grain legumes more than doubled, and their diets are better too because they eat more legumes. And then in 7 states in India, soon 400 villages were double cropping, and now if you go and look up at that map, and it's very widespread double cropping now. Just in the last decade that's happened. That's a big increase. But 2 crops in a year is not the limit. 2 crops is if you just do normal agriculture, then 2 crops is where it's at now. But if you use the super efficient agriculture that's been developed for space colonies, you can do far better than that. You can have 12 crops a year with very fast growing dwarf wheat. So imagine the increase if you did 12 crops a year. So this shows if you had conventional agriculture, then you've got a little under the area of US, China and Russia combined to feed everyone. With biointensive mini gardening, where you do things like intercropping and multiple crops one after another, then you could reduce that to a smaller area than India could produce all the food that the entire world needs. But if you use these super efficient methods that they have developed for space colonies in mind, so space enthusiasts want to set up colonies on the Moon, Mars, and so on. So they have developed, and if you're in a space colony, you can't grow crops on the Moon or Mars. Mars is actually no better than the Moon in this respect. You can't just sow seed in the Moon because it's a vacuum. And on Mars it's a very, very thin atmosphere that's like a near vacuum. So everything has to be indoors. And what's more, in space, it has a vacuum outside. You've got to hold immense pressure. Atmospheric pressure is tons per square meter. 10 tons per square meter of atmospheric pressure. And normally greenhouse will just go whoof, like that. If you were to put an ordinary greenhouse on the Moon, filled with air somehow magically, if you could magically suppose you had a Star Trek teleporter, and you could teleport a greenhouse full of air onto the Moon, and just put it there, it would instantly explode. All the glass panes would, or the plastic would, if it was polytunnel, the polytunnel would never withstand it, it would just explode into lots of little fragments. So that's why they have to develop, they have to have very, very expensive greenhouses, extremely robust construction, and they don't have much room inside them because everything has to be, actually maybe some of it's made in situ, but an awful lot of it has to be sent up into space in giant rockets. So they want the least possible mass. So they have to be very, very efficient. And a single person can grow enough food from 30 square meters with these super efficient methods of agriculture that they developed for the space colonies. And if we used those methods on Earth instead of space colonies, we would only need 2.5% of the Sahara Desert to feed the entire world on a vegetarian diet. And so, I mean, we could feed 1 trillion people on Earth if we use the same technology as they've developed for space colonies. So when you talk about, when people say, oh, things are going to pot on Earth, we're destroying the planet, we've got to have a backup plan. Elon Musk says this, we need a backup plan. We've got to set up a colony on Mars so that we can live there when Earth is no longer, but when we destroy Earth. It's absolute nonsense, absolute ridiculous stuff. We don't need a backup plan. It makes no sense at all to go into space for agriculture, because you can do this far, far easier on Earth. And this is a saltwater greenhouse. Now this is really much, much simpler than the space colony. You bring in the salt water from the sea. The large areas of the Sahara Desert, for instance, which are quite close to the coastline, and the others which are downhill from the sea, so you could have a big pipe, and you could there's actually depressions in the Sahara that's below sea level, and where you could actually, very large areas, where you could actually pipe seawater down, even by gravity down there, if you wanted to. And then, so the way this works is you get the salt from the sea, and then it goes through the greenhouse, and you have these evaporating panels, and the salt water just kind of drips down it. You have a hot, dusty, dry breeze. It goes through these panels, and then the seawater moistens it, and then you get condensation of the humid air. You get lots of crops inside. What's more, outside the greenhouses, then you can't see it there yet, but later on you get green areas outside the greenhouses because of all the moist air that comes out at the other side. So it actually greens the desert outside the greenhouses, and it produces this water which adds to the local aquifers, and it also produces salt as a byproduct. And this is much, much easier to make one of those than to make a space colony with the same output. You've got the air for free, you've got this water just coming from the sea. You don't need to mine for ice or export ice. On the Moon you'd have to go and mine for ice at the poles to get water, and then they have to have a very efficient way of circulating everything around so as not to lose any water. But here, actually losing the water is a benefit because it greens the desert. So this is much easier way of doing it, and it's actually practical. This is happening in parts of Australia, parts of the Sahara Desert. People are already doing this. And so if they were to use the super efficient method, if they were to adapt that, they don't have to, because we've got plenty of food on Earth. So we don't have to go to all the effort that they do for space colonies, where you've got to put everything into giant rockets. But if we wanted to, if we really needed to, we could increase the yield so much that just from 2.5% of the Sahara Desert, we could feed everyone. So there is really no hard limit on feeding things. It's just a matter of how much money, how much work you put into it, and how careful you are. So I think that's quite. I'm a great space enthusiast. I think it'd be great if we have colonies on the moon, but I don't think they're going to be there for the agriculture. That makes no sense. They're going to be on the moon. I think it's going to be like Antarctica, very like Antarctica, but with also some mining as well. So you're going to have the scientists there studying the moon, and then you're going to have the tourists going up there, and just like they do going to visit the penguins in Antarctica. Then you get tourists going to the moon to see the craters and the Apollo landing site and the lunar caves and stuff like that. And then you'll just have and then enjoying the low gravity, the lunar gravity, and Olympic sports. We might well have our first space age Olympics on the moon in the next decade or so. It's rather fun. If you're on the moon, if you are a super fit athlete, then it's like these lizards that run across rivers. If you maybe seen them on television programs, they can run so fast that they can run across on water. Well, on the moon, it turns out a good athlete can run so fast they can actually run on water on the moon. And they can also, in the low gravity, they can actually use powered flight with wings attached to their arms. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun tourist destinations, people going to the moon to fly around inside these big habitats with wings attached to their arms and running on the water and doing dolphin leaps out of the water, which again a fit swimmer would be able to get their entire body clear of the water by sort of swimming fast and then breaking the surface. So anyway, I'm sure we'll have people have big. We'll have settlements on the moon. It'll be a fun place to live, but they have to pay for themselves by some other way, not by agriculture. That makes no sense. They will grow their own food, but the idea of exporting to Earth makes no sense. And they'd be there doing things like mining, and then they need some way to pay for all their spacesuits and stuff, and so they'll be doing things like mining and the ice and then the tourism. The various, like for instance platinum, there's probably lots of platinum on the moon, as some people think. There's quite good evidence. There was a great big impact that hit the southern Aitken crater, and then the central core of it seems to have splashed out on the rims of this huge crater, and there's probably lots of platinum there. And there are various other things that you can export from the moon. Anyway, I haven't mentioned, I'll add a link to my moon first thing to this page. That's just an enthusiasm of mine. But, so anyway, and then we also got sea shedding, and we've also got the giant seaweed farms. So giant seaweed farms, they started, and they could be used both for food, and they also, you can intercrop them with fish, fish, and then you can have the seaweed farms, and then you can have shellfish and things, and then you also can use it for fuel. So if we actually were to use giant seaweed for fuel, it's strongly carbon negative. What's more, it takes carbon dioxide out of the seawater. So if we hugely expanded the giant kelp seaweed farms, then we could de-acidify the oceans, and we could take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And some people are strong proponents for using this. And if we really made a big thing of expanding the giant kelp, if we put as much money into giant kelp seaweed farming as we put into fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, then we could be back to pre-industrial levels of CO2 by the end of the century. And this needs to be, I'm not saying we should do that. And it needs to be scaled up gradually rather than doing it all in one go, because you need to look at all the impacts of it. But it seems on the face of it to be very low impact, especially if you do it in the middle of the oceans, which are natural deserts. So we look at the Earth and we see the land and the deserts on land. We don't really see the deserts in the oceans. But the oceans are really deserts. Only the very tiny fringes of the oceans are very productive along the coastlines. And then the continental shelf is quite productive. Going to the deep oceans, and basically the ocean surface is a desert. And so we've got 4/5 of the Earth's surface is sea, and most of the sea is desert. And it's desert that could be easily turned into giant seaweed farms or seasteadings. In various ways you could build these seasteadings. It's not, these can be made robust enough for hurricanes because they're all, it's not really a problem, hurricanes, for seasteadings. And so that's definitely a possibility in the future. And these are being done already. There's very little seasteading, just tiny experimental stuff, but it is a possibility for the future. But there's a lot of seaweed, giant seaweed, kelp seaweed farms going on. As you can see, I think that's South Korea. There's lots and lots of it off the coast of South Korea and China, and it's gradually expanding in the rest of the world. And we could grow that in the middle of the Great Ocean Gyres, where it's quite stable. Then, so that's, and actually, if we could go back to pre-industrial levels of CO2, if we start having huge amounts of seaweed farms, we mightn't actually want to do that. The problem is that we are actually increasing. We've got the fertilizing effect of the CO2. We've got the warming, which is leading to longer growing seasons in the northern hemisphere, especially in higher latitudes. We've got used to having ice-free Arctic in the summer, which is leading to billion-dollar industries springing up. And there'd be a lot of people who would object if we were to say, oh well, we're going to go back to pre-industrial levels and the Arctic is going to freeze over again, and Northern Europe is going to have its shorter growing season again, and the various countries that are used to higher crop yields because of the CO2 are going to have lower crop yields again, and so on. There will be quite a lot of protests if we really did have this global decision, will we go back to pre-industrial? So although we could, I don't think we will. I think we're heading to pretty much optimal for the levels of CO2, so long as we don't go up too much higher and don't do it too fast. So that's a big problem with global warming. It's not the end point. Even 10 degrees C warmer would be a very habitable world. Indeed, if we can adapt the crops to it, then it might well even be more habitable, although there would be parts that would be too warm for humans to live there without technology. We have areas that are too cold for humans to live there without technology. So we would have people who would have to, just like you have to live in warm houses or you'll die in Siberia, and you have to live in cold places or you'll die in a 10 degrees C warmer world in places like India and China, in hotter parts. So it's not impossible that we actually, but we're not headed that way. We're very well, we're doing, it's the time, if we increase to 10 degrees C over, say, 4 or 5 centuries, nobody mind at all. Even 10 degrees C warmer than now, because they just gradually move. It doesn't, one century after another, and change their way of doing things. So that was what I was saying. Not that we're headed for 10 degrees C, we're actually headed for more like 2.35 degrees C with the latest statement of intent by China. We absolutely have to keep on doing all the green. I'm not saying we should just let go and stop doing all the. We've got to do the zero emissions by 2050. The reason things will, or later this century, it's best to we really should be heading for 1.5 degrees C. If we go to 2 degrees C, we already have huge impacts on the coral reefs. And above that, then when we get to 3 degrees C, which luckily we've already managed to stop doing that, to avoid that, then you start getting large areas of forest that turn to savanna. You also get large areas of savanna that turn to forest. It turns out that in Africa, then you actually get an increase in the tropical rainforest at 2 degrees C, at 3 degrees C kind of increases in temperature. But in South America, you get a shift, and you get a decrease of the totally stable and bistable, which can be either tropical rainforest or savanna. Then that shifts, and so, but it's the same area. So it's really the speed of the transition is the main problem. If we were to get to, even if we could get to 3, 4, 5 C over, say, 4 centuries, and the coral would just adapt, because there's coral that's already anywhere in the world. There's somewhere else where there's coral that's adapted to even warmer temperatures, and then also you get new coral reefs setting up, because as the world gets warmer, then places that were too cold for coral are now getting coral organisms turning up there and just making a very, very little start of building tiny, tiny little reefs. And it's going to take absolutely ages for those reefs to grow up and to be big enough and to have big coral reefs there. And that mainly is the problem. And then the other ones, like the Great Barrier Reef, they're adapting. The corals are adapting to warmer and warmer temperatures, but it just takes quite a long time. And so that's really the situation. So, and we absolutely don't, we're not going to run out of food on any scenario. No, not even business as usual, which we can't even do now. We've got all these things we can do. We've got the increasing yield is particularly, if you look at the increasing yield in Africa, there's such a huge margin there. 1 billion people in Africa, and they could grow enough food for 5 billion or something probably, or several billion. No, sorry, I shouldn't say that. No, I don't know how many, but they could grow enough. They could grow an awful lot more food. I know they are importing some food in Africa. It's about 1 billion people there, and then obviously a 5-fold or more increase in crop yields is possible. I was just saying off the top of my head, it sounds like they could feed 5 billion, I'm not sure about that, but I think they could. It depends on what proportion of their own food they're growing now. So I was making a little bit of too much of a leap there. But, for instance, Nigeria could grow. I won't say any, but I would have to look up some of these figures. I've got lots of articles on this that you can go and look up with links and sites, and you can follow them further. But the main thing is that there's a huge margin increase in India. In Africa, there's a big increase possible in India, and that's it's also all the double cropping. Even the United States has got a huge possibility for increase with things like double cropping, improved crop yields. It's not going to just stop at that point. It's going to keep on going up, and then you've got, you could have 6, 5, 10 times that amount if you were to use space agriculture, which is just the kind of the limit of So just remember that. And this shows that Africa is like sort of about here in its agriculture. Something like that. It's like a huge increase that we got in the United Kingdom from the early mid-19th century to what we've got now. And this, actually Africa is not even at our 1900 level, it's down there somewhere. It's more like our 19th century level of yields per acre at the moment. Which sort of makes sense, because it is really large areas of Africa still very primitive agriculture. You're more like 19th century Europe in their level of agriculture. It's early 19th century Europe. Despite all the increases since then, a lot of people are using quite basic agriculture. Still over large parts of Africa, doing lots of things by hand, not much not much automation, and it's really like early 19th century Europe. So they've got a huge, huge margin of increase that they can do. So I hope I think it's the main things I wanted to say. I think I've said everything. So anything else I want to say? So yeah, I'll just talk about the things I've got at the bottom here, and that's be done. So I just want to give you this. So I just want to give. Yes. So then, I haven't talked about reversing desertification. This is this was a really I should give it to the before and after. This used to be desert, before and after, and this is an area that was just all complete desert. And there's some really nice before and after photographs of what it looked like before and what it looks like now. And so the many areas of the world we're actually using reversing desertification. So with a warmer world, people get the impression, oh, it's a warmer world, so everywhere is going to turn to desert. That's not true. With a warmer world, there's more moisture in the air because the sea is warmer, and you actually get it's climate change. Some parts actually even get cooler as the world gets, so that it's global warming because the entire globe average goes up, and that's the average over 30 years and the entire world. So average over 30 years in the entire world, the temperature is going up. If you take a 30-year period set in 2030, it'll be warmer than a 30-year period set in 2020 or set in 2010 of the entire world. But parts of the world are actually cooler, and you get the big, mainly near Antarctica and a patch in the North Sea. Just if you look at the local climate, then you get things like big swings and very, very cold conditions sometimes in winter in North America, for instance. And that's because it's climate change, not everything warming. And sometimes it actually may get colder in winter in some places and things like that. So it's the same with drying. So some places get drier, but some places get wetter, and some places stay the same. Like I said, there's going to be a shift there's going to be an increase in areas of Africa that can be tropical jungle. There's going to be a shift in South America. Most of the rest of the world, tropical jungle area is not affected in a warmer world. And but there's going to be like droughts in Spain and Turkey, for instance. In some areas of the Mediterranean, it gets very dry in a warmer world. So they're having to do lots of work on that. Another area that gets very dry is southern United States, which is why it seemed quite bizarre that the United States would withdraw from the Paris Agreement, because they're one of the worst impacted. Because at high temperatures, then the southern states would have big impacts on crop yields, and they will have to do lots of work to make sure this doesn't happen. And so we have to be building in resilience. So the areas that are like that, they have to build in resilience and make sure that they don't dry out and turn into deserts by growing different kinds of plants and irrigation, micro and drip fed agriculture and things like that. So you can stop the desertification. In other areas, like in, for instance, Ethiopia, they could growing lots of trees, reversing desertification. They're doing the same as this. I said, used to be just sand. That was just orange sand, and now it's that. Look at it, and you can watch this video and find out. And they're doing that in many areas of the world. Indeed, in all areas except Africa and especially Southern America, then there's much more reforestation than deforestation. The forests are increasing. And I live in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is the end result of thousands of years of deforestation. Especially Scotland, where I live, then the mountains used to be covered in trees. All the may have seen the photograph of the Scottish landscape with the bare hilltops. Well, it looks very beautiful, but it's very unnatural, because if it weren't for humans, then there would be trees right up the top of most of the mountains in Scotland. There would just be tree covered all the way up. And so the United Kingdom is the end result of thousands of years of deforestation. And we are now reforesting again. So much of Europe used to be like that. A squirrel could go all the way from one side of, probably from John O'Groats to Land's End, and probably from one side of Europe to the other. And so some of that is now going back, and people are regrowing the forests. And same in North America. In North America, large areas of forest, which are now gone, and gone quite quickly. And so that's what's happening in South America. So when we look at Brazil and we say, oh, bad Brazil, they're cutting down their rainforest, then we need to say, well, look at Europe and look at the United States. And we did that too. So just that Europe did it thousands of years ago, and the United States did it centuries ago, and now Brazil is doing it. So the tropical rainforests are much more biodiverse, and so it's especially important to keep the Brazilian tropical rainforest. But we should have more understanding of their situation, and we should realise that what Brazil is doing, it's also because they have native people living in the rainforest who depend on the rainforest. But then the same was true in the United States with Native Americans, and in Europe we must have had, way back whenever it was, we had native people living in the forest then too, when the Romans came and knocked down forest and so on, and the Druids and so on. So even that is not really so different from what other countries have done. But that doesn't mean it's good. So of course it's important to look at to stop this. And the good news is, so I actually have a section on that in the one on I have an article up there we are. No, not that one. Where is it? Here we are. This one. So this is about Brazil, and how this is about how it's projected, if you go into the 2020s, then the pressure on the rainforest in Brazil is going to go down hugely because of the improvement in its agriculture. Remember, it can double its efficiency again before it gets to United States levels for crops, and it can more than double its efficiency for cattle, which is a big export from Brazil. And that means it can grow the same crops and the same animals from half the land area. So this process is going on. They are increasing the efficiency of the crops and the cattle in Brazil. And this is going to, but they are also having increasing demand, and at the moment the increase in the yields is not quite keeping up with increasing demand. But the yields is projected to keep on going up quite faster than increasing yields, demand, and as a result, even with increasing demand, the Brazil is projected to soon, sometime in 2020s, to according to medium-term projections. Of course, it all depends on various assumptions, and you can't, it's hard to know. It depends. The assumptions, how well the assumptions match the reality, but it's a middle road of assumptions with increase in demand and increase in yields, and then we can make this much better by actually putting a lot of investment into increasing yields. So, for instance, the grassland in Brazil is very poor quality. They cut down the forest, and then they get the grassland that grows up naturally, and then the farmers can't afford to reseed the grass, which is just a standard thing that farmers do in the United States. Instead they go and cut down more forest. But if they if they had a bit more investment, then they can instead reseed the grass and get much better grass, and so they can have many more cattle on the same area of land. So if Brazil was to put a big investment into giving the small farmers the technology and the seeds to reseed their grassland, then they would get a big productivity increase, take the pressure off the rainforest, and the farmers would be much better off, and the investment would pay itself back. And so there are projects in Brazil doing exactly that, where they are investing, but it's a case of getting enough finance and getting international investors to invest into it, and then these projects, and then demonstrating to the farmers that this works. And because the farmers have to get enrolled in it in Brazil, and the investors have to be convinced it's going to work, and this sort of thing. And so the various NGOs and so on in Brazil are trying to get this underway. So and a very big push on that would mean that you'd reduce the impact on the Brazilian rainforest much faster. So we shouldn't just be saying, stop burning down the rainforest, but we should look at the root problem and put more effort into this, which I say many people are already doing it, and actually helping the small farmers. So Bolsonaro, I mean, his methods aren't, he's encouraging, he's popular with small farmers because he's letting them go and cut down rainforest, but the more sustainable long-term future is to invest in them so they don't have to do that. And it's going to happen naturally, but it'll happen faster with more investment into that. And then the best way to do that then is then you get this this grey area is what's left over as a result of, so you get quite large areas of land left over. That grey area is not used for anything. And so then the question is, what do you use it for? And a good way of using it is you have a mix of commercial forest, but then you also have regeneration of the tropical rainforest along the rivers. And so that would be very much like what's happening in Europe, of the reforestation. So there's no reason why we can't have reforestation in Brazil of the areas that used to be rainforest, then were cut down, and then they can regenerate, especially along the rivers. That's a very natural corridors that you have in Brazil. So that can happen in Brazil, and it can happen just as happening in Europe, and it's already happened. I mean, it's been happening for centuries in Europe, and it is happening in parts of Brazil. For instance, the Eastern Atlantic forests, which used to be used for, what was it, cocoa or something? And anyway, there's I talk about it here. You can click through and find out. But that's already happened. That the forests are regenerating because there's less of the agriculture going on now. So we're probably the last decade that we still have rainforests being cut down in Brazil. There's no reason why it can't turn around. It could turn around much faster with a very strong effort to do it a sustainable way. Very strong effort in sustainable agriculture in Brazil could turn it around really much faster. Anyway, so that's that, and some positive articles. So go and have a look at. Some people still tell me, they're worried that humans are going to go extinct, or many species are going to go extinct. I should put that thing about the leaders of there's big work. So when David Attenborough produces these programs, he's very activist, and he just goes negative, 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 negative. Does about 9 or 10 negatives, and then one little positive and another negative. This is not the true proportion of the way it is in the world as a whole. There's a huge amount of positive going on, but he just doesn't talk about them because he's trying to get you to act. So you need to be aware that these programs, what they're talking about are genuine things, but they leave out all the positive stuff. And it's a mistaken idea about how to get people to act. They have the idea that if you just really lay down the negative and make it look very, very horrible, then people will want to do something about it. But instead they just despair and sometimes suicidal, and this is not the right way at all. And the experts in psychology of how to help people make change happen say that you actually have to talk about the positive, and you have to bring in stories about these other people who've done this, who've done these positive things before, and show that you're not alone. You're not by yourself trying to fight to change a world that is on a path to doom, and there's nothing you can do about it. But if you try really, really hard, then you can make a little dent in it. That is not the way to get people to act. If you want the average person, your one or two kind of crusader type mentalities will kind of act in that situation, but most people will just give up. But if you say what is actually the true situation, that there's an awful lot of good going on, there's an awful lot of promise, we know how to feed everyone, we know exactly how, we've actually worked out how to stop the extinctions. We know how to do it. An awful lot of it is shifting subsidies. So instead of subsidising things that destroy the rainforest, you subsidise things that preserve nature services, like I was just talking about for Brazil. Move your subsidies. So you subsidise the farmers who are using their own land more efficiently, instead of subsidising the ones who are cutting down rainforest, which is a shift. No more money, just shifting what you're incentivising. But it's quite hard to do because of vested interests. And so all over the world, that's what we've got to do. And that was the IPBES, what they were saying in their summary in 2019. They didn't say that there are a million species going to become extinct. That million figure is including insects and little things in the creek, in the sea and in the soil and so on. But it's about, and they aren't at risk of extinction anyway. It's only a small fraction of those that are really at risk of extinction. Most of them, that figure wasn't really well explained in the media. But what they were saying is you can save those million species, and they said exactly how. And so it's food waste. Then there's so I've got the 12 things you can do. I've said that somewhere here. So yeah, if you have a look at that. So this shows how much land area is used for various things. So that's fresh water, that's cropland. That's the built-up area, very tiny. Glaciers, barren land, and that's greenish forest, I think. And this is all shrubland. So it's mapped onto a similar area on the globe to the actual area. So the area of China is roughly the total land area of crops. And that's not including meat. And then if you look at livestock, then it's the two Americas is land area set aside for that. And the orange area, if you were to eat 50% less meat, that's how much land area would be saved worldwide. But it depends on the kind of meat. So if you look at, say, Laplanders, then a reindeer herd in Lapland, then it would make no sense for them to eat rice from China. That wouldn't save anything. Of course, they might if they're vegetarian for some other reason, but if you're talking about the best for the world, then reindeers are very good for the world. They help maintain the right habitat up there. So you don't want to stop reindeer herders from herding reindeer and eating the reindeer meat. So this whole thing about meat eating or not depends on what kind of meat it is. And whereas on the other hand, if you look at grain-fed beef, then that's like the really that is the really at the other end of a massive amount of land is used to produce the grain to feed the meat, far more than the land that the animals are grazing on, because they're being fed all this grain that's grown on other land somewhere else in the world where you don't see it. So grain-fed meat uses up a lot of land, and then fish farming is one that wants to use very little land, in fact no land, for the fish themselves, but then you've got a little bit of the feed for the fish, so it depends what you feed them. But it's a very small amount. So if you change to eating less land-intensive meat, then you don't even need to eat less meat. But you can see from your amount saved with 50% less meat, if you had 20% less meat, or you stop 20% of the meat that we eat is wasted on the plate, a lot of it at the consumer's end. So 20% of that, that's 50%, something like that. Even your area of much of the United States, getting on for quite a large area, is just wasted on people's plates. That area is used for growing meat, it's just wasted. So reducing meat waste would save a large area of land. And in the same way also reducing your consumption just a bit. So the aim is to reduce the amount of meat that is either wasted or is consumed by 20% by 2050. And if we do that, it's much easier to achieve the other goals. And so that's one thing you can do personally, and that can include using more sustainable meat, shifting, instead of just eating less. So, for instance, if you have, as many people do in the more meat-eating countries, if you eat meat with every meal, then if you have one day a week where you don't eat meat, then this is going to be a big impact in terms of reducing. So don't think about, a lot of people think, oh, but what's the point in doing all this? Because I go on a plane and there's so much CO2 emissions from planes. Don't think about it like that, because planes are like 2% of the world emissions, and the aviation industry has planned to go all the way to halve the emissions, even with increasing flights, and the various ways we could actually even go down to zero emission aviation. So that's just a separate thing. And although it's reasonable to draw attention to aviation, but it's I understand the activists that do that, and then they think that their own personal effect is reduced. But if you think of the global impact, then actually reducing meat eating is much more important than making some shift in aviation. Aviation is more important in the 2040s, when we're down to just a few percent of the CO2 emissions we have now. So if you think about it like that, and then think about how the effect of your changes is affecting other people, then really we should be focusing much more on this, and on reducing food waste of all sorts, vegetarian food waste as well. So that's that. But the many other things you can do, yes, and then, I haven't put the 12 ways, I'll add the 12 ways. There's the many other ways that we can improve you can personally improve. So I think I'll stop now, because I've gone to now. I don't want to go on now, and then maybe I'll do a shorter one at some point. I know a lot of people, then this is this is for people who want a longer video, and maybe I'll do a shorter one about this same thing. So just shout out for Doomsday Debunked, and if you're scared of such things, and then also if you are knowledgeable, if you're a good fact checker, then to have a look, to come visit our group and help some of the scared people here. And also if you're good at reassuring scared people and just helping people who are going through what is often the very worst day, week, month, year of their life. Just people going through a really hard time and sometimes suicidal because they believed, or just because of reading stories on Google News. Not anything personal happening in their life, because they've come to believe that we're going to be extinct in a few years and stuff like that. So this has a really huge mental impact on many people, and it's just false. There's just no truth to it. I mean, yes, I just had a brief section on that. That's why I included this section here, because it comes up so much. Just look at that. If anyone says, we're going to go extinct, how? Ask them how. How are we going to go extinct in this world? That's even business as usual, and that's low emissions. We're going to be somewhere more like that. How is that world too hot for humans? Just ask them that. And then, you don't need to ask them, but so if you hear someone saying, we're going to go extinct in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, then you know this person has thought through their thoughts. Either an activist, they're just lying, and they know we're not going to go extinct, or their thinking is incredibly confused. They just haven't managed to put together. They must know. They surely don't think that all the ice in Greenland is going to melt, unless they have very poor background in science and just haven't read up climate science at all. And so some cases maybe they just do literally think that all the ice in Iceland is going to melt, and the world is going to become like a desert all over, and it's going to be as hot as Venus or something. But that's not true at all, obviously. And then some of them, I think, maybe they just have our mind is kind of partitioned. You get these partitions where you have this one thought there, another thought there, and they actually contradict each other. So you actually know there's going to be ice in 2100. Then in another part of your world, you are follower of the Extinction Rebellion, and you say humans are going to be extinct by 2100, and you never kind of let those two thoughts meet each other. So you get people you get that happen as well. But if you just, I was like that, not for that particular thing, but for planetary protection. Then I was very keen on humans to Mars, and then I also knew that they sterilise their spacecraft, like the Voyage Viking lander, in order to land them on Mars. And I never brought those two areas together and think, how are humans going to be sterilised to go to Mars to protect the planet? And I just had these compartments in my mind. And it's only maybe a decade or two ago that I actually realised that humans colonising Mars are an issue for protecting the planet and any native life there. So it's amazing how our minds are capable of doing that. So anyway. So I'll end that here. Upload it.